Hello my friends, Dr. Shaikh here from the Dentalist. I hope you're having a good time learning with us. In the last video, we talked all about dental waxes, the types, properties, and also the lost wax technique. The lost wax technique is sort of relevant to the topic we will discuss today, since our topic for today is investment materials and refractory dies. By the way, if you haven't watched the last video, I'd recommend that you watch it first so that you could have a better understanding of today's topic. So, following the production of a wax pattern by either the direct or indirect method, as discussed in the last video, the next stage in many dental procedures involves the investment of the wax pattern to form a mold. A sprue is attached to the pattern and then it is located in a casting ring. Investment material is poured around the wax pattern while it is still in the fluid state. When the investment sets hard, the wax and sprue former are removed by softening and burning out to leave a mold which can be filled with an alloy or ceramic using a casting technique. This technique is the lost wax technique. We have learned in depth about this technique in our previous video with proper illustrations, so make sure you check it out. Now we need to understand that the investment mold used for casting alloys and some castable ceramics need to be constructed from a material which retains its integrity at the casting temperature. Unmodified dental plasters or stones are not suitable for this purpose. A group of materials which are closely related to the investment materials are the refractory die materials. Refractory die materials are used for making dies on which ceramic restorations, for example porcelain crowns, are constructed. As for the investments used in casting, a prerequisite of the refractory die material is its ability to retain the structural integrity at the temperatures used to fire ceramics. Phosphate-bonded die materials are most commonly used for the construction of refractory dies. We'll talk about all these types of investment materials and refractory die materials in this video ahead, so make sure you watch it till the end. First of all, let's talk about what to expect from investment materials for alloy casting procedures. Since the investment material forms the mold into which the molten alloy will be poured, we need to understand that the accuracy of the casting metal can be no better than the accuracy of the mold. If the mold loses its integrity or is not dimensionally stable, the crown prosthesis that will get through the process would also not be dimensionally accurate and might not even fit on the tooth. Therefore, it is essential for you to realize how important these investment materials and refractory die materials are. The investment should be capable of reproducing the shape, size, and detail recorded in the wax pattern. Since casting is carried out at very high temperatures, often in excess of 1000 degrees, the investment mold should be capable of maintaining its shape and integrity at these elevated temperatures. In addition, the investment should have a sufficiently high value of compressive strength at the casting temperature so that it can withstand the stresses set up when the molten metal enters the mold. Remember that these alloy castings undergo considerable contraction when cooling from the casting temperature to room temperature. If we are not aware of these contractions, then we won't know that such contraction may result in a casting with a very poor fit. For example, a simple class 1 inlay would be loose fitting, whereas a crown would be too small and short at the margin. One function of the investment mold is to compensate for this casting shrinkage. This is generally achieved by a combination of setting expansion during the hardening of the investment mold and thermal expansion during the heating of the mold to the casting temperature. The main factors involved in the selection of investment material are the casting temperature to be used and the type of alloy to be cast. Some gold alloys are cast at relatively low casting temperatures of around 900 degrees, while some chromium alloys require casting temperatures of around 1450 degrees. The investment which is best able to retain its integrity at the casting temperature and able to provide the necessary compensation for casting shrinkage is chosen. I hope that you now understand the criteria on which investment material to be used is selected. It is selected based on the integrity at a certain casting temperature and the ability to compensate for casting shrinkage. Okay? Investment materials consist of a mixture of refractory material, normally silica, which is capable of withstanding very high temperatures without degradation, and a binder, which binds the refractory particles together. The nature of the binder characterizes the material. There are three main groups of investment material that are commonly used. They are referred to as gypsum-bonded, silica-bonded, and phosphate-bonded. First, let's talk about gypsum-bonded materials. These materials are supplied as powders which are mixed with water and are composed of a mixture of silica and calcium sulfate hemihydrate, which is gypsum, together with their minor components including powdered graphite or powdered copper and various modifiers to control setting time. By the way, I have a separate video entirely on gypsum, so in case if you want to watch it, I'll attach the link somewhere on the screen. Now back to the topic. So these gypsum bonded investment materials have the main ingredient as silica and calcium sulfate hemihydrate. You should always remember that silica is a refractory material which adequately withstands the temperatures used during casting. It is available in three allotropic forms: quartz, cristobalite, and tridymite, which are all chemically identical but differ slightly in the crystalline form. Quartz and cristobalite are used extensively in investment materials. In addition to imparting the necessary refractory properties to the investment, the silica is responsible for producing much of the expansion which is necessary to compensate for the casting shrinkage of the alloy. The expansion is accomplished by a combination of simple thermal expansion coupled with a crystalline inversion, which results in a significant expansion. Now, what is this crystalline inversion? Quartz undergoes an inversion at a temperature of 575 degrees from the so-called low form or alpha cores to the so-called high form or beta cores. This inversion is called as crystalline inversion. For cristobalite, conversion from the low to the high form occurs at a lower temperature of around 210 degrees. Generally, the expansion is probably due to a straightening of chemical bonds to form a less dense crystal structure. You need to remember that the change is reversible, and both quartz and cristobalite revert back to the low form on cooling. The overall thermal expansion and inversion expansion of materials containing cristobalite is greater than those containing quartz. Now let's talk about the second important component of the investment material other than silica, which is, yes, calcium sulfate hemihydrate. The calcium sulfate hemihydrate is an essential component since it reacts with water to form calcium sulfate dihydrate, which we know as gypsum. It effectively binds together with the refractory silica. The chemistry of setting and important properties of gypsum products have been discussed in a previous video. I'll attach the link and make sure you watch it. The setting expansion of the calcium sulfate dihydrate when mixed with water is used to partially compensate for the shrinkage of the alloy which occurs on casting. Further compensation can be achieved by employing the hygroscopic setting expansion, which occurs if the investment mold is placed into water at the initial set stage. The latter method is known as the water immersion hygroscopic expansion technique and can result in an expansion of 5 times the normal setting expansion. Another method is the water added technique, in which a measured volume of water is placed on the upper surface of the investment material within the casting ring. This produces a more readily controlled expansion. Hygroscopic expansion is further encouraged by lining the casting ring with a layer of damp asbestos, which is able to feed water to a large surface area of the investment mold. This is mostly referred to as a casting ring liner. This technique is routinely employed even when no attempt is made to maximize hygroscopic expansion by immersing in water or adding water. The mechanism of hygroscopic expansion is not fully understood. However, it is believed that water is attracted between crystals by capillary action, and this extra separation of particles causes an expansion. The magnitude of the hygroscopic setting expansion, which occurs with gypsum-bonded investments, is definitely greater than that which occurs with gypsum model and die materials. Now, you must be wondering, why can't we just simply use gypsum as investment material and get rid of all the fuss? We cannot. Gypsum alone is not satisfactory as an investment for alloy casting, since it contracts on heating as water is lost and fractures before reaching the casting temperature. The magnitude of the contraction, which occurs rapidly above 320 degrees, is significantly reduced in investment materials by the incorporation of sodium chloride and boric acid. There are three types of gypsum-bonded investments. Type 1 is the thermal expansion type for casting inlays and crowns. Type 2 is hygroscopic expansion type for casting inlays and crowns again. Type 3 is for casting complete and partial dentures. The ISO standard for gypsum-bonded investments allow individual products to be described by more than one of the above types mentioned. For example, materials may be both type 1 and type 3, but must satisfy most of the requirements outlined in the two standards. Interestingly, the ISO standard describes all of these materials as dental gypsum-bonded casting investments for gold alloys, implying that they are suitable only for a limited range of alloys. Now, let's talk about the second type of investment materials, which is silica-bonded investment materials. These materials consist of powder quartz or cristobalite, which is bonded together with silica gel. On heating, the silica gel turns into silica so that the completed mold is a tightly packed mass of silica particles. The binder solution is generally prepared by mixing ethyl silicate or one of its oligomers with a mixture of dilute hydrochloric acid and industrial spirit. The industrial spirit improves the mixing of ethyl silicate and water, which are otherwise incapable of being mixed together. A slow hydrolysis of ethyl silicate occurs, producing a sol of silicic acid with the liberation of ethyl alcohol as a byproduct. By the way, do you know what the difference between sol and gel is? Sol is a liquid state of colloidal solution, whereas gel is a solid or a semi-solid state of a colloidal solution. I hope you know what a colloidal solution is. If not, then just remember that it is a mixture in which insoluble particles of one substance are suspended or distributed evenly throughout another substance. The particles are generally larger than those in a solution and smaller than those in a suspension. That is why they found the need to name it as a separate entity and called it as colloids. Paint, milk, blood, toothpaste, and fog are colloids. Can you name any examples of colloids used in dentistry? I will wait for your answer in the comments. Anyway, going back to the topic. We were talking about silica-bonded materials. So, after the production of sol of silicic acid, the silicic acid sol forms silica gel on mixing with quartz or cristobalite powder under alkaline conditions. The necessary pH is achieved by the presence of magnesium oxide in the powder. Stock solutions of the hydrolyzed ethyl silicate binder are normally made and stored in dark bottles. The solution gels slowly on standing and its viscosity may increase noticeably after 3 or 4 weeks. When this happens, it is necessary to make up a fresh solution. Simultaneous hydrolysis and gelation can be promoted by amines such as piperidine, Unfortunately, such a procedure is accompanied by an unacceptable shrinkage, which is a result mainly of the hydrolysis reaction. In order that the material should have sufficient strength at the casting temperature, it is necessary to incorporate as much powder as possible into the binder solution. This process is aided by a gradation of particle sizes such that small grains fill in the spaces between the larger grains. A very thick, almost dry mix of investment is used, and it is vibrated in order to encourage close packing and produce as strong an investment as possible. A small shrinkage occurs during the early stages of the heating of the investment prior to casting. This is due to the loss of water and alcohol from the gel. The contraction is followed by a more substantial thermal expansion and inversion expansion of the silica, similar to that for gypsum-bonded investments. Ethyl silicate bonded investments do not expand on setting in the same way that gypsum-bonded and phosphate-bonded materials do. The total linear expansion is therefore identical with the linear thermal expansion. Now let's talk about the third and last type of investment material today, which is phosphate-bonded investment materials. These materials consist of a powder containing silica, magnesium oxide, and ammonium phosphate. On mixing with water or a colloidal silica solution, a reaction between the phosphate and oxide occurs to form magnesium ammonium phosphate. This binds the silica together to form the set investment mold. The formation of the magnesium ammonium phosphate involves a hydration reaction followed by a crystallization similar to the formation of gypsum. As in the case of gypsum, a small expansion results from the outward thrust of growing crystals. The phosphate material is also able to undergo hygroscopic expansion if placed in contact with moisture during setting. Moisture adversely affects the unmixed material, and the container should always be kept closed when not in use. The use of colloidal solution of silica instead of water for mixing with the powder has the dual effect of increasing the setting expansion and strengthening the set material. On heating the investment prior to casting, mold enlargement occurs by both thermal expansion and inversion of the silica. Thermal expansion is greater for the colloidal silica mixed materials than for the water mixed materials. At a higher temperature, some of the remaining phosphate reacts with silica forming complex silicophosphates. These cause a significant increase in the strength of the material at the casting temperature. Two types of phosphate-bonded investment can be identified as follows. Type 1 for inlays, crowns, and other fixed restorations. Type 2 is for partial dentures and other cast removable restorations. Now that we have discussed about all three types of investment materials, and you kind of now have a good idea of the importance and use of investment materials, let's discuss about the properties of investment materials. First property is thermal stability. One of the primary requirements of an investment is that it should retain its integrity at the casting temperature and have sufficient strength to withstand the stresses set up when the molten alloy enters the investment mold. Gypsum-bonded investments decompose above 1200 degrees by interaction of silica with calcium sulfate to liberate sulfur trioxide gas. This not only causes severe weakening of the investment but would lead to the incorporation of porosity into the castings. Thus, gypsum-bonded materials are generally restricted to use with those alloys which are cast well below 1200 degrees. This includes the majority of gold alloys and some of the lower melting base metal alloys. The majority of base alloys, however, have higher casting temperatures and require the use of a silica-bonded or a phosphate-bonded material. Another reaction which may take place on heating gypsum-bonded investments is that between the calcium sulfate and carbon. The carbon may be derived from the residue left after burning out of the wax pattern, or may be present as graphite in the investment. Further reaction can occur liberating sulfur dioxide. These reactions occur above 700 degrees and their effects can be minimized by heat soaking the investment mold at the casting temperature to allow the reaction to be completed before casting commences. The presence of an oxalate in some investments reduces the effects of gypsum decomposition products by liberating carbon dioxide at elevated temperatures. Phosphate and silica-bonded materials have sufficient strength at the high temperatures used for casting base metal alloys. The strength of the phosphate-bonded materials is aided by the formation of silicophosphates on heating. The cohesive strength of the phosphate-bonded investments is such that they do not have to be contained in a metal casting ring. The material is generally allowed to set inside a plastic ring which is removed before heating. Although it is the strength of the investment material at the casting temperature which is most critical, but this is difficult to measure. The normal method used for evaluating the strength is therefore to measure the compressive strength at room temperature 2 hours after starting to mix the material. The higher strengths of the phosphate-bonded materials mean that these products are becoming widely used for casting all types of alloys, precious, semi-precious, and base metal. The wax burnout temperature is varied to suit the type of alloy being cast. Typical wax burnout temperatures that you should always remember are as follows: gold alloys 700 to 750 degrees, palladium silver alloys 730 to 815 degrees, and base metal alloys 815 to 900 degrees. This temperature is normally held for 30 minutes for small molds and 1 hour for larger molds before the metal is cast. Burnout times need to be extended when resin-based pattern materials are used. The next property that we want to talk about is porosity. Now you should know that the gypsum-bonded and phosphate-bonded materials are sufficiently porous to allow the escape of air and other gases from the mold during casting. The silica-bonded materials, on the other hand, are so closely packed that they're virtually porosity-free, and there's a danger of back pressure building up which will cause the mold to be incompletely filled or the castings to be porous. These problems can be overcome by making vents in the investment, which prevents the pressure from increasing. The silica-bonded materials, on the other hand, are so closely packed that they're virtually porosity-free, and there's a danger of back pressure building up, which will cause the mold to be incompletely filled or the castings would be porous. These problems can be overcome by making vents in the investment, which would prevent the pressure from increasing. Now, compensating expansion is another important property that I want to talk about. The accuracy of fit of a casting depends primarily on the ability of the investment material to compensate for the shrinkage of the alloy which occurs on casting. The compensating expansion is achieved by a combination of setting expansion, thermal expansion, and the expansion which occurs when silica undergoes inversion at elevated temperatures, as we discussed before. Hygroscopic expansion can be used to supplement the setting expansion of gypsum-bonded materials. This is also possible for phosphate-bonded materials, but it is rarely used in practice for these products. The degree of the thermal expansion depends on the nature of the silica used in the investment and the temperature to which the mold is heated. So remember, when thermal expansion is used as the primary means of achieving compensation, a cristobalite containing investment mold heated to around 700 degrees is required. Silica-bonded investments undergo a slight contraction during setting and the early stages of heating. This is due to the nature of the setting reaction and the subsequent loss of water and alcohol from the material. Continued heating causes considerable expansion due to the close-packed nature of the silica particles. For phosphate-bonded materials, a combined setting expansion and thermal expansion of around 2% is normal. provided the special silica liquid is used with the investment. Many manufacturers of phosphate-bonded investments supply instructions which enable the expansion to be varied so that the casting shrinkage of the alloy can be compensated more precisely. This variation is achieved by diluting the special liquid with water. Hence, by selecting the most appropriate liquid dilution, the investment can be made to compensate casting shrinkages for both base metal alloys and gold alloys. The expansion reaches a maximum at 700 degrees and remains the same to 1000 degrees. The lowest permissible burnout temperature for any particular alloy normally gives the best results, so it is essential to follow the directions given for any particular alloy. Consideration of the relatively large casting shrinkages which can occur with some base metal alloys in the comparison with the compensating expansions possible with the investments may suggest that ideal compensation is not always possible. Now, let's talk about the applications of investment materials. Here's a table that gives the primary applications of the three main groups of investment materials. Pause the video and have a good look at this table when you feel like. Of the three main types of investment material, the phosphate-bonded products are becoming the most widely used. Silica-bonded materials are rarely used nowadays due to the fact that they're less convenient to use than the other products and that the ethanol produced in the liquid can spontaneously ignite or explode at elevated temperatures. Some laboratories regularly use phosphate-bonded materials even for gold castings. This practice allows the laboratory to stock only on one type of investment, which is suitable for all cases. The phosphate-bonded refractory die materials are used in a different way to the investments. A duplicating impression of the working die is made, usually using a proprietary material. The mixed refractory die material is poured into this impression and allowed to set. It is then removed from the impression and consolidated by firing at about 1000 degrees. The surface is then coated with a thin layer of glaze and the die refired at a slightly lower temperature, for example at 970 degrees. The surface glaze helps to prevent moisture from the porcelain from being soaked up into the porous die material. That is all for today, my friends. I hope you now have a better idea about what investment materials and refractory die materials actually are and what the main purpose of these materials is. I have also put down a quiz for you. The link for the quiz is in the description. Please make sure you take that quiz to assess your knowledge. If you have any questions or feedback, you know what to do. Please write them down in the comment section below. And please like the video, share it with your friends. Also make sure you subscribe to the channel with the bell notification turned on so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Lots of exciting videos on many important topics coming soon. So stay with us. Take care till we meet again.